I don't want you anymore. Pack your things and be gone by tomorrow." With that one cold-hearted statement, the air in the midnight living room should have frozen solid. Before me, a strange woman with garish red lipstick clung to my husband's arm like a trophy. And next to her, my husband, nodding in satisfaction. She can't even give me a child, and she brings nothing to the table. This is for the best. Such unbelievable words were thrown around casually in this surreal space. Yet I, the one who had just been handed this unreasonable sentence, did not shed a single tear. I simply ran a pen quietly across the divorce papers pushed in front of me. But at that moment, none of them, smirking before me, could have known. From the instant they cast me aside like a worthless liability, the quiet revenge that would blow their own lives to smithereens had already begun. The hands of the clock had just passed 11 at night. The dining table, made of my favorite marble that I polished without fail every day, now had a single set of divorce papers tossed unceremoniously in its center. "I bet you're shocked, wondering what this is all about?" My husband, Ethan, said, his voice disgustingly cheerful, like a man who had just pulled off a major success. At 37, he had recently been promoted to the vice president position at his company, a long-held dream. Perhaps because of it, he had become more full of himself than ever, a condescending arrogance now permanently etched onto his face. Pressed tightly against Ethan's side was a flashy-looking woman, probably in her mid-20s. A luxury brand handbag sat on her lap, its cloying perfume filling the quiet living room. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thompson," said the woman, who introduced herself as Jessica. "But Ethan just insisted he wants to build a new life with me." Though she spoke words of apology, her eyes were filled with a clear sense of superiority and disdain for me. Some people just can't compete when a real power couple gets together, can they? At Jessica's words, followed by a light titter, I simply stared back at her in silence. A real power couple. Those words, in the past, would have been a sharp blade, gouging my heart deeply. I lost my parents in a sudden accident when I was a child, and grew up being passed from one relative's house to another. Everywhere I went, I was treated as an unwanted burden, feeling small and out of place. Still, I studied desperately, earned a scholarship, and went to college. I worked myself to the bone to finally grasp a normal, happy life, a warm home. That was what my marriage to Ethan was supposed to be. Jessica is right. Connections are what matter, after all, the mother-in-law chimed in with a shrill voice, lounging on the sofa. She had always been a person strangely obsessed with social status and appearances. A girl with no family, no background. She brings nothing to the table. To think my son married a woman who's a total unknown was a disgrace to this family's name. From the beginning of our marriage, she had hurled such words at me without a second thought. Ethan, who had initially defended me, had a drastic change in attitude as he climbed the corporate ladder. He began to ignore me with a click of his tongue when I spoke, and his temper tantrums over trivial things became a daily occurrence. Lately, he had been staying out until the dead of night like this. A woman from a good family with connections, like Jessica, is more suitable to be by my side now, not some nobody like you. You get that, right? Ethan looked down on me with cold eyes, as if looking at an old, unwanted piece of furniture. Besides, you have no family to go back to, no one to back you up. You have nothing. You're an empty woman. Once I stop supporting you, you won't even be able to survive. I'll cover the security deposit on this apartment, so just sign the papers and get out. Listening to his words, I realized that my heart had turned completely, almost unnervingly, cold. There was no sadness, no anger, not even despair. There was only a quiet resignation, a final confirmation. So these people truly are this irredeemable. Seeing my silence, the three of them seemed to misunderstand, thinking I was too shocked to even speak. "Well, hurry up and write," my mother-in-law urged, tapping her fingernails on the table. "I'm sure you have nowhere to go, but your time in this house is up." I slowly exhaled and picked up the ballpoint pen from the edge of the table. Without hesitation, I smoothly wrote my name and signed the documents. Then, I quietly pushed the papers back in front of Ethan. "Huh?" Ethan let out a dumbfounded sound at my unexpectedly swift action. Did he expect me to cry and beg him to stay? I slowly raised my head and looked at each of their faces in turn. "As you wish, I will disappear." My voice was surprisingly low and clear, even to myself. In that instant, the air in the living room seemed to freeze. Jessica's triumphant smile tightened slightly, and my mother-in-law frowned with a wary expression. But Ethan quickly scoffed it away. "Huh. Don't act tough. You'll be lost on the streets soon enough and realize how much you needed me." He said this and smugly tucked the divorce papers into his expensive designer briefcase. Watching his triumphant face, I smiled quietly to myself. Yes, goodbye, Ethan. You may not know it, but I am not the kind of woman who will just silently accept defeat. You will soon learn that, down to the very marrow of your bones, because the quiet, calculated revenge I have been meticulously preparing has already entered its final stage. How intensely I had longed for what I considered a warm family, Ethan, more than anyone should have known. That is likely why he could utter such cruel words so effortlessly. My parents passed away in a sudden car accident when I was just 6 years old. The warm dinner table filled with laughter, my mother's gentle scent, my father's large hand things that were a given until yesterday all slipped through my fingers forever, accompanied by the piercing sound of sirens. My life from then on was anything but smooth. Having lost my family, I was passed around among relatives. That girl is coming again? We barely have enough for ourselves. They should just put her in a foster home. I grew up always hearing the piercing whispers of adults from behind the closed doors of dimly lit rooms. I am an unwanted, burdensome presence. That cold, cruel reality planted a deep, dark root called loneliness in my young heart. That's why I worked so desperately not to be a bother to anyone. I juggled multiple part-time jobs while studying furiously, received a scholarship to go to college, and fought hard to find a job during an economic downturn, seizing an independent life with my own hands. And at the end of that blood-sweating effort, the modest, ordinary happiness I finally grasped was my encounter with Ethan and our marriage. When we first met, Ethan was a truly kind and sincere young man. Who cares if you don't have parents? That's proof that you've worked so hard on your own, Grace. From now on, I'll be your real family. You don't have to cry alone anymore. The night he proposed, in a restaurant with a view of the city skyline, he held my hand tightly, and I saw no falsehood in his eyes. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. With this man, I could build a warm home, no matter what difficulties we faced. I believed it from the bottom of my heart, without a doubt. However, that fleeting illusion began to crumble with a crash from the day we went to meet his parents for the wedding announcement. Oh my, you don't have parents? And you were passed around from one relative to another, people we don't even know? How pitiful. But there are plenty of young ladies from much better families for our Ethan. His mother looked me up and down, from head to toe, as I stood there nervously bowing my head for the first time, and then let out a long sigh. To my mother-in-law, who came from a long line of landowners in Connecticut, and was a fierce believer in social standing, I, an orphan with no connections, was nothing more than an unknown pauper. A girl with no family has no sense of propriety. Even the way you speak reveals your lack of proper upbringing. That became her favorite phrase to direct at me. Whenever I visited their home for holidays, I wasn't even allowed to sit down, forced to work like a maid. And in the middle of family gatherings, she would continue, "This girl is truly useless." It can't be helped, given her background, making me a laughingstock for all the relatives. Still, for the first few years, Ethan would defend me, saying, "Don't worry about what my mother says. I love you." The only reason I could endure all the vicious harassment was that he was on my side. But the tide turned decisively after Ethan was promoted to vice president at the age of 35, with unprecedented speed. With a major position, he began to associate with company executives and presidents of client firms, and gradually became obsessed with his own status and appearance. As a VP's wife, you need to dress better. You look so shabby. A woman like you, with no influential relatives, is a complete liability for my career. The words that came out of his mouth had, before I knew it, become identical to those of his mother, looking down on me as a low-class human being. Coming home late every night became the norm. If I waited up for him out of concern, he would snap. "Are you monitoring me?" How annoying. Conversely, if I went to bed first, he would click his tongue in displeasure. I come home exhausted and there's no one to greet me at the door? The slightest thing that displeased him would result in him slamming doors and giving me the silent treatment for days. This kind of insidious emotional abuse became a part of daily life. Don't act so high and mighty when you're living off the money I earn. You're a lowlife who can't even survive without me. That was his go-to phrase to corner me mentally. And the final blow to our relationship was the shadow of another woman. The cloying scent of perfume, not my own, wafting from his discarded shirts. The constant buzzing of notifications on his smartphone. When I questioned him, he would just laugh it off, saying, "It's for work. It's a world you, with your sheltered life, wouldn't understand," and dismiss me. It didn't take long to realize he was having secret trysts with his subordinate, Jessica. The kind person who once promised to be my family was nowhere to be found in this world anymore. All that was left was a cold-hearted man who lived only for his own shallow vanity and desires, a man who would trample on my dignity without a second thought. In the back of the bedroom closet, I let out a quiet breath. I could still hear the vulgar laughter of the three of them from the living room. Is she in the bedroom crying her eyes out right now? It's fine, Ethan. Just kick that creepy girl out. Starting tomorrow, Jessica will be the proper lady of this house. Listening to those heartless voices, I, with a heart devoid of all emotion, quietly took out my smartphone. On the screen, the scheduled arrival time of the moving company I had already arranged for was glowing. Yes, laugh all you want. This night, when you believe you've stolen everything from me, will be the last peaceful night of your lives. Outside the window, a quiet wind had begun to blow, as if heralding the dawn of my new life. With a rough clatter, the bedroom door was thrown open. As I was quietly packing my clothes into a suitcase in front of the closet, the presence of the three of them loomed behind me. Ethan's face was slightly flushed, perhaps from starting their celebration in the living room, and he held a half-empty glass of expensive whiskey. Behind him, Jessica and his mother peeked in with predatory smirks. Packing up already? You're obedient, at least. I guess your kind of upbringing makes you quick to pack it in when it's time to go, Ethan said, leaning against the doorframe and clinking the ice in his glass. As if on cue, Jessica added in a sickeningly sweet voice, "We'd be in a real bind if you left your tacky old clothes here, so please make sure you take every last thing with you. I need to fill the closet with all my new dresses." That's right, this room is already steeped in the stench of poverty. We'll have to call a professional cleaning service tomorrow and have the whole place fumigated. This is what happens when someone with no background crosses our doorstep, his mother said, pinching her nose and letting out an exaggerated sigh in my direction. Their words were thrown at me one after another like sharp thorns. But they no longer caused a single ripple in my heart. Their venom, which once tore my heart to shreds, now sounded to me like nothing more than a ridiculous farce. I stopped what I was doing and slowly turned around. Don't you worry, I'll take every last one of my things. Not just my clothes, but everything, tonight. I wouldn't do anything as uncivilized as to let my presence linger in your magnificent home a moment longer. You can rest easy. My completely calm response made Ethan frown slightly. He had expected me to be a weeping, begging mess, and my attitude must have seemed deeply unsettling to him. "Ha, don't act so tough," Ethan raised his voice, trying to hide his irritation. "Where do you think a woman with nowhere to go like you can go in the middle of the night? You'll probably find some seedy motel on the edge of town, right? With my money. Listen, once you step out of this house, you're never allowed back. Don't come crying to me for help later." "Crying? To you?" I let out a laugh, a genuinely amused one. "What are you misunderstanding? I am grateful. I'm finally being freed from this suffocating place. From the days of cowering from your abuse, enduring my mother-in-law's endless harassment, and crying over the shadow of your mistress. I'm truly happy to be free of that pathetic drama." "What did you say?" Ethan's face changed color. A man who prided himself on being an elite, a man whose ego was a fragile mountain, could not stand being dismissed as pathetic by someone he looked down on. His hand holding the glass began to tremble with rage. Jessica immediately stepped forward. "Excuse me, but you should stop with the sour grapes. For someone with your background, you should be grateful for the rest of your life that you got to marry an elite from a top-tier company like Ethan. A lowlife like you wouldn't have even had a decent life if he hadn't picked you up." Jessica puffed out her chest triumphantly and clung to Ethan's arm again. "That's right. A woman who has only stained our family name has no right to talk back so sassily." His mother chimed in with her high-pitched voice. I looked at Ethan, his face contorted with anger, and the two women fanning the flames, as if they were creatures from a distant, separate world. "An elite from a top-tier company, you say?" I slowly turned my gaze to meet Ethan's. "Certainly, you may have an impressive title right now, but I wonder how long that plating will last. You don't even seem to realize how thin the ice you're standing on is." "What the hell are you trying to say?" Ethan's voice dropped. My quiet yet confident tone may have triggered an instinctive sense of crisis in him. "Just now, Jessica, you mentioned a power couple. And, mother-in-law, you believe that connections are more important than anything. But what do you people know about real partnership? A relationship built on lies, vanity, and a willingness to betray people for your own desires. What part of that is real?" The moment I said it, Ethan's face turned beet red with fury. "You bitch. Who do you think you are, talking like that? Who do you think put food on your table? He shouted and was about to lunge at me. It was at that exact moment. Ding dong. The clear chime of the intercom echoed through the silent apartment. The three of them jumped, their bodies freezing. Who is it at this hour? Ethan muttered warily. As I quietly zipped up my suitcase, I answered, It's the moving company, here to take my things. A moving company? Yes. I arranged for a team of professionals specializing in overnight moves a few days ago. I told you, didn't I? I'll be gone by tonight. I pulled a heavy black attaché case from the back of the closet, a case I had kept hidden for a long time. Inside, sleeping as a thick stack of files, was a trove of evidence that they would never want to see the light of day. I held the attaché case firmly and walked past the three of them, who stood there dumbfounded. Go on, by all means, celebrate with your new, real family, because this will be the last peaceful night of your lives. Without a single glance back, I walked toward the front door, where the intercom was still buzzing. Thrown at my back was only the presence of the three of them, wrapped in a stunned and eerie silence. On this night, the flimsy world that Ethan and the others believed they had built would begin to crumble with a deafening crash. The starting bell had just quietly rung. When I opened the front door, 4 burly men in impeccably tailored black suits stood there, lined up in silence. Our apologies for the late hour. We've come to retrieve the packages, the man who seemed to be the leader said with a deep bow. Without another word, they began to efficiently carry out the boxes and suitcases I had stacked in the entryway. Perhaps startled by their flawless efficiency and strange air of intimidation, Ethan and the others who had followed me were momentarily speechless. But they quickly regained their characteristic arrogance, crossed their arms, and scoffed. What's this? You called in a pretty dramatic moving crew. Are you trying to put on a final show with the last of your savings? I bet it's from the slush fund you skimmed from the money I earned. For someone with no background, you sure have a lot of pride, Ethan sneered. Following his lead, a shower of malicious words began to pour from the mouths of the three of them. Ha, really? Clutching that heavy black case so tightly. I bet it's just full of cheap clothes and junk, Jessica said, pointing at the attaché case in my hand and laughing mockingly. She was smiling innocently, not suspecting for a moment that its contents were a bundle of evidence of fraud and infidelity that would end their lives. Besides, you're so plain, Mrs. Thompson. You have no glamour at all to be walking next to an elite like Ethan. Everyone at the company says he looks much better with me by his side. Now, the right couple can finally be together. Jessica sidled up to Ethan, clinging to his shoulder. Jessica is absolutely right. Now the air in our house can finally be clean, the mother-in-law said, theatrically fanning her face with her hand and glaring at me as if looking at something foul. Just the thought of breathing the same air as a woman with no family to speak of was enough to make me sick every day. Ethan, make sure you have the place professionally aired out tomorrow. We can't have even a hint of that jinx around, or it might bring down your good fortune for your career. From now on, a proper young lady with breeding and class like Jessica will protect this house. I'm so relieved. I know, Mom. Honestly, it was a moment of youthful indiscretion. But to think I took pity on and married a woman with no value whatsoever, it's the biggest stain on my life. A woman with no value. The words he spoke on that day, from now on I will be your family, promising to save me from rock bottom, what were they? To him, was I just a convenient tool to flatter his own sense of kindness, or perhaps just a housekeeper to take care of him until he made it up the ladder? The insults and humiliation were hurled at me one after another. But my heart remained strangely calm. More than anger, I felt a sense of pity for the bottomless ugliness of the people in front of me. All packages have been loaded, the man in the suit reported quietly. Thank you. Shall we go? I nodded to them and was putting on my shoes to leave when Ethan shouted after me, as if to land a final blow. Hey, Grace, listen up. When I turned, Ethan had his arms crossed, looking down at me with a face as if he were a morally superior being. Starting tomorrow, you'll have no home to return to, no family to rely on. You'll be certified trash, all alone. Even if you end up starving on the street, don't you dare call my office. If you're groveling on the sidewalk, maybe I'll toss you $1. Ha ha ha, Ethan, you're too kind. $1 is too much for someone like her. Jessica clapped her hands and burst out laughing, while the mother-in-law nodded in satisfaction. I seared the image of their ugly, twisted faces into my memory. I'll return those words to you exactly as you said them. But I won't even be tossing you $1. What did you say? As Ethan was about to get angry again, I quietly but firmly closed the front door. A dull thud echoed in the apartment hallway, completely shutting out their filthy voices behind the thick steel door. The cold night air brushed against my flushed cheeks. As I exited the building's lobby, I quietly got into the passenger seat of the waiting vehicle. "Are you certain about this, madam?" the older man behind the wheel asked in a quiet voice. It was a voice too deep and composed for a simple mover. "Yes, I've seen more than enough of their true nature," I said, clutching the attaché case in my lap and staring at the flowing nightscape outside the window. "Starting tomorrow, erase all traces of me. Make sure they can never find me again." "Understood, madam." And so, I, Grace, the supposedly powerless wife, completely vanished from Ethan's and the others' lives. In that apartment, they were probably opening a bottle of expensive wine, toasting to their victory now that the nuisance was gone. However, at that time, I had yet to imagine that they would launch another, even more despicable attack in an attempt to push me further into the abyss. The morning after I quietly left the apartment, I was shown to the presidential suite on the top floor of one of the city's most exclusive luxury hotels. Waking up in a plush, pure white bed and taking a sip of freshly brewed Earl Grey tea while gazing out at the New York City skyline from the massive window, that simple act filled my heart with an unprecedented sense of peaceful liberation. But that tranquility was shattered by a single incoming call that made my smartphone vibrate. The screen displayed a call from the director of Sunnybrook Children's Home, the facility where I had stayed as a child. The director was a woman who had treated me like her own daughter and had continued to care for me even after I became an adult. "Hello? Mrs. Gable? What's wrong calling so early in the morning?" I answered in a bright voice, but from the other side of the receiver came the director's unusually strained and trembling voice. "Grace. Oh, thank goodness. You're safe. Where are you now? Are you hurt?" "Hurt? No, I'm not hurt at all. What happened? You sound so frantic." "Just a little while ago, Ethan called the home. He was absolutely furious," she said. Hearing the director's words, I narrowed my eyes. Ethan had resorted to a vile tactic to socially isolate and utterly corner me. According to the director, Ethan had called the home first thing in the morning and screamed at her. "That damn Grace ran off with another man, taking millions of my money. If she comes crying to you, don't you dare help her. If you let her set one foot on the property, I'll sue this facility for harboring a criminal. With my connections, I can have all donations to this dump stopped in an instant." My hands trembled with anger at the blatant lies and despicable threats. The only things I had taken were my own personal savings from before the marriage and my personal belongings. I hadn't touched a single cent of Ethan's money. On the contrary, I had covered most of our living expenses with money from my part-time job. Ethan's salary had all disappeared into his bar tabs to maintain his image and gifts for his mistress. "Grace, I know you better than anyone. I know you're not the kind of person who would do something like that. But with your husband in that state, there's no telling what he might do. Maybe you should talk to the police." The director's voice was a mixture of deep affection and fear for my safety. "Mrs. Gable, I'm so sorry to have worried you, but it's okay. I have a safe place to go, and the idea that I stole money is a complete lie. I will absolutely not cause any trouble for the home. So please, don't worry." I reassured the director in the calmest voice I could manage and hung up. Immediately after, I noticed a voice message from Ethan on my phone. When I hit play, his familiar voice, filled with malice and triumph, echoed through the quiet suite. "Hey, Grace, are you shivering on some street corner by now? I was surprised to see all your junk gone this morning. You even took the dishes Jessica was planning to use. How pathetic can you get? But your cheap tricks won't work on me. I had all the credit cards and bank accounts you were using frozen first thing this morning. And I also made a call to that pathetic little children's home you love so much. I told them you're a thief. Now you have no place to go, no money, and no one to help you. How does it feel? Do you feel the full weight of your powerlessness? If you come groveling to me by this evening, maybe I'll spare you $100. Come and apologize on your knees." The message ended abruptly. Ethan truly believed he was in complete control. The family credit cards and accounts he mentioned were ones I was never allowed to use in the first place, so having them frozen meant nothing to me. However, the fact that he, believing me to be a poor, helpless orphan, had turned his fangs on the people I held dear, that fact ignited a cold, blue flame deep in my chest. I slowly walked over to the window. Below me, the city of New York spread out like a miniature model. So that's how badly you want to crush me. Until now, no matter how terribly Ethan had treated me, I had thought it was enough to simply leave quietly without making waves. I believed I could just watch from afar as they self-destructed after I left the divorce papers. But he had crossed a line he should never have crossed. He threatened the home that raised me and tried to destroy the safe space of innocent children. He believed without a doubt that he was the powerful one and I was the weak one, that people without power or money could only be oppressed and forced into silent submission. That is why I have to teach him. I have to show him what kind of despair awaits a person who constantly judges others as worthless and looks down on them. Very well, Ethan. If that's what you want, I will erase you and your flimsy pride completely from society. I picked up my smartphone and dialed a certain number. The call connected after just one ring. Good morning, Miss Sterling. Did you sleep well? The voice on the other end was the calm, composed voice of the older man who had picked me up last night, acting as the moving company's driver. He was my personal executive assistant, Harrison. Yes, I slept very well, Harrison. About the plan, I said quietly, looking at my own cool-eyed reflection in the window pane. No more holding back. Move the schedule up. I want everything put into motion, starting today. Understood, Miss Sterling. We will mobilize the full resources of Sterling Price Capital at once. Ethan and the others, who had sneered at me for being a lone orphan, still had no idea. They didn't know the biggest secret of all, that I was Grace Sterling, the adopted daughter of the founder of the colossal investment group Sterling Price Capital, which moves the American economy from behind the scenes, and the vice chair who held the de facto power of life and death over the very company where he worked. A few hours later, a quiet knock sounded on the heavy door of the presidential suite, and my assistant, Harrison, appeared. He held a thick stack of files in his arms. Miss Sterling, my apologies for the wait. I have gathered all the documents you requested. Thank you, Harrison. But let's drop the Miss Sterling for now. From today, I am acting as the vice chair. When I said this and turned to face him, Harrison's eyes narrowed, and he bowed his head deeply. The person standing there was not the pitiful wife in plain, old-fashioned clothes from the night before. Dressed in a beautifully tailored dark navy suit that fit my frame perfectly, I stood with my back straight, the very image of Grace Sterling, the vice chair who leads the colossal investment group, Sterling Price Capital. Sterling Price Capital is a mega conglomerate that invests vast sums in various companies both at home and abroad. And it's no exaggeration to say it supports the American economy from the shadows. My legal name is Grace Sterling. Arthur Sterling, the founder and former chairman of the Sterling Group, is my adoptive father. After losing my parents at the age of 6 and being passed around among relatives, I ended up at the Sunnybrook Children's Home. It was my adoptive father who had been supporting the home with large donations for many years. This child knows deep sorrow. That is why, more than anyone, she understands the pain of others. She has strong, kind eyes. That's what my adoptive father said to me, the lonely girl who was always reading a book by herself in a corner of the room, as he gently extended his hand. After being adopted by him, I made a blood-sworn effort to repay the unconditional love and expectations he showered upon me. Business administration, economics, foreign languages. I was grateful for the environment I was given and greedily absorbed everything. As a result, I was entrusted with the crucial position of vice chair at a young age. However, there was one sad feeling I could never shake. The moment people learned I was the heiress of the Sterling Group, their attitude would change completely. I had seen more than enough of adults who bowed deeply not to me, but to the vast assets and power behind me. That's why I wished from the bottom of my heart to meet someone who would love me for who I am, just Grace, a single person, regardless of family name, title, or money. To make that dream come true, I hid my identity and took a job as a regular office worker. That's where I met Ethan. Who cares if you don't have parents? That's proof that you've lived your life working hard on your own, Grace. From now on, I'll be your family. At the time, he knew my fabricated background of being a penniless orphan and still said he loved me. In those warm words, I found true salvation for the first time in my life, and I vowed in my heart to love him for the rest of my life. I have watched from your side for a long time, and I know how purely you loved him, Harrison said, his eyes cast down with a pained expression as he placed the files on the table. It was painful for me as well to watch him change, poisoned by success and fame. You tried to reach out to him so many times, yet that man not only failed to realize your true worth but looked down on you and heartlessly betrayed you. Yes, it's quite ironic, isn't it? I said with a self-deprecating smile, staring at the freshly brewed tea. He came to value connections and status above all else. But the very person he looked down on the most and threw away like trash was the very power he craved so desperately. If I had revealed from the start that I was a Sterling, he would have cherished me, groveling on the ground. He would have worshipped me like a goddess with a constant fawning smile. But a relationship held together only by money and power has no value to me. Harrison, what's the situation at Ethan's company? My tone dropped as I shifted into business mode, and Harrison's expression immediately sharpened. Yes, the company where Mr. Thompson is a vice president is currently receiving large-scale business financing from an investment fund under the umbrella of Sterling Price Capital. In effect, we hold the power of their life and death. I see. So, what about that large contract he's in charge of? Ah, the new project that Mr. Thompson has been aggressively pushing. That too is structured so that one of our affiliated companies makes the final decision. Harrison slid a single document in front of me. It was the contract for the major project that Ethan was using as a stepping stone for his promotion, the one he was most proud of. It was now in a state where it could be completely nullified with a single signature from me. Then, Harrison opened another thick file. The costs for dining, hotel stays, and purchases of luxury goods, when he was taking his mistress, Jessica, around, have all been improperly processed as company expenses. Furthermore, we have already confirmed definitive evidence of receiving rebates or kickbacks from subcontractors. We have also identified all the slush funds he had personally accumulated. I looked through the perfect evidence and nodded quietly. The information I had been gathering underwater for years while enduring his abuse, combined with Sterling Price's intelligence, made cornering him a simple task. Good work. We're ready to move at any time. Yes. With your authority as vice chair, we can socially obliterate them at any moment. What are your instructions? At Harrison's question, I took a deep breath and looked up at the New York sky spreading outside the window. They mocked me as a pitiful woman with nothing. They threatened my precious safe space, the home, and tried to involve innocent people. There is no longer any reason to show mercy. I turned to Harrison and slowly, but with absolute coldness, gave the order. Contact the president of Ethan's company immediately. And suspend all major contracts Ethan is involved with, effective immediately. There's no need to explain the reason. Just tell them the contracts are being voided. Understood. I will arrange it at once. Harrison bowed deeply and left the room. I smiled quietly at my own reflection in the window pane. Now, Ethan, savor the sensation of the status and money you cherished most crumbling to dust. The real hell is just beginning. That afternoon in Ethan's office, he was leaning back deeply in the plush leather chair of his VP suite, sipping a cup of expensive coffee with satisfaction. I wonder what that pathetic girl is doing now. Probably fighting pigeons for breadcrumbs in some park. Ethan, you're so bad. But that's what you call a real lowlife, isn't it? On the visitor's sofa, his mistress, Jessica, was letting out a vulgar laugh, her legs showing from under her short skirt. The two of them were completely convinced that they were the winners, and that Grace was somewhere at the bottom of society, crying miserably. Well, who cares? Thanks to getting rid of that jinx, my life is all roses from here on out. If the new downtown redevelopment project succeeds, my promotion to the board of directors is guaranteed. Just as Ethan was about to wrap his arm around Jessica's shoulders with a smug look, the door to the VP's office was suddenly thrown open. Sir, we have a huge problem. It was Ethan's subordinate, Miller, who burst in with a frantic look on his face. Miller's face was as white as a sheet, and the fax papers he held in his hand were trembling. What is it, Miller? You didn't even knock. You're startling Jessica. Ethan frowned in annoyance, but Miller was in no state to care. It's the downtown redevelopment project, sir. We just received a unilateral notice of contract termination from the main sponsor, the investment fund. What? Ethan snatched the papers from Miller's hand with a dumbfounded look. There, in cold, hard print, were the words notifying the immediate cancellation of the contract. What is this? Are you kidding me? We're about to break ground. What about the penalty fees? Get them on the phone, now. While Ethan was yelling, the phone on his desk began to ring shrilly. Sir, Apex Construction just called to cancel all material orders for next month. Here too, sir. The affiliated group of companies we had a business alliance with in the Midwest have all announced they are terminating their contracts. Report after report came flooding in from his subordinates. The office fell into a massive panic, like a disturbed beehive. In just 1 hour, a single hour, the major clients that Ethan had spent years building up, or rather, that he had mistakenly believed were his own achievement, had withdrawn from the project one after another, like a row of dominoes. What is happening? Ask for the reason. The reason. That's just it, sir. Every company is saying it's a decision from the top, a serious compliance concern. We can't get a straight answer from anyone. In the midst of the panic, the internal line from the CEO's office rang. Thompson, get to my office now. Even over the phone, the CEO's roar was clearly at its limit. Sir, what in the world is going on? When Ethan rushed into the CEO's office, he found the CEO in a rage, having just smashed an ashtray on the floor. That's my line. What the hell have you done behind my back? I haven't done anything. I've just been working diligently for the company's profit. Liar! The CEO's bellow echoed through the room. I just received a final notice from our biggest source of funding, a fund affiliated with Sterling Price Capital, that they are pulling all of our financing. When I demanded a reason, they said it was due to significant compliance violations and acts of bad faith by a specific individual at your company. Sterling Price Capital. Ethan gasped at the name. If Sterling Price abandoned them, this company would go bankrupt in less than a month. It's not just your projects. The entire company's fate is on the line. If you've angered Sterling Price because of your misconduct, you're fired, effective immediately. No, I'll sue you for damages and put you in jail for life. Find the cause now and get on your knees and beg them to reinstate the contracts. With his face pale and sweat pouring from his entire body, Ethan staggered out of the CEO's office. My misconduct? Could it be? Did they find out about the expense fraud and the kickbacks from subcontractors? No, that's impossible. I covered my tracks perfectly. Muttering to himself, he returned to his desk, only to find his personal smartphone ringing like crazy. The screen showed Mom. With a trembling hand, he pressed the answer button, and his mother's shriek, loud enough to burst his eardrum, shot into his ear. Ethan, help me! What should I do? Mom, what is it? I'm in the middle of a huge crisis at work. My business is finished. The manager of our main bank just rushed in, looking frantic, and told me they're stopping all our loans. And they're demanding we repay the $500,000 we owe in a lump sum by next month. $500,000 in a lump sum? Why so suddenly? His mother ran a high-end boutique and a small real estate business in their hometown in Connecticut, presenting herself to the community as a wealthy socialite. But in reality, her business was a house of cards built on massive bank debt. I don't know. The bank just said it was a directive from their headquarters that our credit rating has dropped to 0. At this rate, they'll seize the house, the land, everything. Ethan, you're an elite, right? Do something. On the other end of the line, his mother, who was always lecturing others, was weeping in a pathetic voice he had never heard before. Mom, calm down. I'm not in a position to. Just as Ethan was about to say that, an impossible thought flashed through his mind. The massive contract cancellations at his company, the wrath of Sterling Price Capital, one of the largest firms in the country, and the inexplicable reversal from the bank regarding his family's business. All of this had happened simultaneously, within a few hours this morning. A coincidence? No, such a terrifying coincidence couldn't exist. Someone with immense power was intentionally tightening the noose around their necks. But who would go to such lengths to completely obliterate a mere salaried man like him from society? At that moment, the image of Grace, quietly leaving with her attaché case the night before, flashed in his mind. That face, looking down on them with cool, detached eyes. As you wish, I will disappear. No, it can't be. That's impossible. She's just a penniless girl with no one. Ethan stared at his smartphone with vacant eyes, his knees trembling so much he thought he would collapse. The ground beneath his feet, which he had believed to be absolutely solid, was crumbling into darkness. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. Amidst the ringing phones in the office, Ethan was finally beginning to realize that they had opened the lid to a hell from which there was no return. As dusk fell, an eerie silence enveloped the office. The phones, which had been ringing incessantly just hours ago, were now completely silent. The employees, all with pale faces like rats fleeing a sinking ship, had scurried home. Left alone, Ethan loosened his tie, his dress shirt soaked in cold sweat, and held his head in his hands at his desk. Hey, Ethan, you're done with work, right? Let's go get some French food. I'm starving, Jessica said, sidling up to Ethan's back with a cloyingly sweet voice, completely oblivious to how desperate the atmosphere in the office had become. In her mind, the only thing that existed was the rosy future of herself becoming the wife of an elite VP. Shut up, just be quiet. Huh? Why are you making such a scary face? It's just 1 or 2 canceled contracts. It's not a big deal. With your skills, you'll land a new deal in no time. Jessica's carefree laughter sounded to Ethan like the grating noise of a saw on his nerves. It wasn't 1 or 2. In the last half a day, every single project Ethan was in charge of had been completely halted, and every last cent of funding from the company's major clients had been withdrawn. The CEO had declared, spitting, that if he couldn't resolve the situation by tomorrow, it wouldn't just be a dismissal for cause. They would sue him for damages and force him into bankruptcy. Damn it. All of them, turning on me like that. Who the hell is trying to sabotage me? Ethan gripped his smartphone with a trembling hand and began calling the powerful connections in the business and political worlds who had supported his career. But the results were disastrous. Calls were rejected. The few who answered hung up in a frightened voice the moment they heard Ethan's name, telling him never to contact them again. It was as if the very existence of Ethan Thompson had become a deadly plague that no one dared to touch. The last person he clung to was a senior executive at a major investment bank who had once favored him and had pulled some strings for his big project. After more than 10 rings, the call finally connected. "What is it, Thompson?" The executive's voice over the phone was as cold as ice, with the tone of a stranger. "Mr. Davison, please help me. All of our funding from the Sterling Price affiliated fund was suddenly cut off. It has to be some kind of mistake, right? Please, could you speak to the higher-ups at Sterling Price?" "Don't be a fool." A roar, loud enough to burst his eardrum, came through the phone. "Because of you, our bank received a warning from Sterling Price that they would suspend all business with us." "A mistake? Don't make me laugh." This was a direct order from the top of Sterling Price Capital. The top? But I've never even met any of the executives at Sterling Price. Never met them? Listen. Sterling Price has definitive proof of your embezzlement and accounting fraud. And not just that. They even know about your mother's debt-ridden House of Cards business. Who the hell did you cross, Thompson? Proof of embezzlement. The blood drained from Ethan's face. The kickbacks from subcontractors. The misuse of company funds for his trysts with Jessica that was his secret side, which he had personally managed and concealed so that no one would ever find out. The person you're dealing with is the vice chair of Sterling Price, the one who pulls the strings of the entire American economy. Once you're in their sights, a small fry like you has no escape until you're socially obliterated. Don't ever involve me again. An impersonal electronic tone beeped, and the call was cut off. No way. How could they know about my secret ledger? Ethan muttered in a daze. Beside him, Jessica sighed in boredom. Ugh, this is so boring. You know, yesterday, that frumpy wife of yours left holding a heavy-looking black attaché case so carefully. I bet it was just full of junk, but she looked so serious. It was hilarious. A black attaché case. The moment he heard those words, Ethan's heart lurched with a sickening thud. Jessica, what did you just say? Huh? I said, your wife? With the black attaché case? Arg! Ethan violently shoved Jessica aside and ran like a madman to his personal locked cabinet at the back of the office. No, this can't be. Tell me it's not true. The secret compartment at the back of the drawer, hidden behind a heavy lock where no one would ever find it. With trembling hands, Ethan punched in the combination and yanked the door open. The safe was completely empty. The double entry books for his slush fund, the written promises from subcontractors, the bundle of receipts from luxury hotels with Jessica, all the evidence that must never see the light of day, had vanished without a trace. Grace. Ethan finally realized he had been completely set up. The wife he had looked down on as a woman with nothing, a woman he had used like a maid, she hadn't just been crying and accepting her fate. For years, while Ethan was abusing her and gallivanting with his mistress, she had been living under the same roof, suppressing her emotions, quietly and surely weaving the rope to hang him. And last night, the moment he made her sign those divorce papers, she had kicked the stool out from under him with her own hands. She wasn't just some nobody. How is she connected to a massive organization like Sterling Price Capital? In a panic, Ethan dialed Grace's number with a shaking finger. It was the number that she had always answered within seconds, no matter how many times he ignored her calls, obediently replying, "I'm sorry, I'll be right home." But this time, a cold, automated voice echoed in the silent office. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Duh! Ethan slammed his smartphone onto the floor and screamed, clutching his head. The terror of realizing that the absolute superiority he thought he possessed was all a fiction. The moment of downfall, of realizing the bug he had been crushing under his foot, was actually a colossal monster towering over him. As if to mock him, the night view of New York outside the window glittered coldly. Unable to even pick up the smartphone, its screen now shattered on the floor, Ethan just collapsed where he stood. It's a lie. A lie. A lie. Grace, setting me up. It can't be. Watching Ethan repeat the words like a mantra, his head in his hands, the carefree smile vanished from Jessica's face. Ethan, listen to you? Cancelled contracts, a missing ledger. Don't tell me you're getting fired? Jessica's voice had lost its cloying, sweet tone and was now mixed with a sharp, cold ring. Not just fired. I pissed off Sterling Price Capital. They could sue me for hundreds of millions in damages. My life is over. Huh, you've got to be kidding me. Jessica stood up abruptly and looked down on Ethan with cold disdain. I put up with a bossy guy like you because I thought I was going to be the wife of a rich, elite VP. Without money, you're just an arrogant, nagging old man. How dare you talk to me like that? It's the truth, isn't it? I was so tired of putting up with your abusive personality. The thrill of taking you from your wife was fun, I guess. But I have no use for a broke man. Jessica spat out the words with disgust, snatched the luxury handbag from the sofa, and stood up. That's it. As for alimony, make sure the credit card bill for the things you bought me gets paid. Goodbye, Mr. Elite. With the sharp click-clack of her heels, Jessica left the office without a single glance back. Wait, Jessica, you're abandoning me too? Ethan reached a hand into the empty air, but all that remained was the hollow silence of the deserted office. Abandoned even by his mistress and pushed to the depths of despair, another blow was about to land on Ethan. Hasty footsteps echoed down the hallway. Ethan! Ethan, where are you? The door burst open and his mother rushed in, looking frantic. She, who always wore expensive designer clothes and perfect makeup to play the part of a high society lady, was now a shadow of her former self. Her luxurious silk blouse was wrinkled, her hair was a mess, and her nearly bare face was ashen with terror. She looked like she was being chased by something. Mom, why are you at the office? Your phone wasn't connecting, so I took a cab. Hurry up and get me the $500,000. The bankers are at my store, seizing everything of value. My diamond ring, my mink coat, all the neighbors were pointing and laughing at me. At this rate, they'll take the house, the car, everything, and I'll be out on the street. The mother-in-law grabbed Ethan's lapels and screamed in a hysterical state. Are you kidding me? I don't have that kind of money. They're about to sue me for hundreds of millions. Ethan shoved his mother away with all his might. She fell to the floor and stared at him with eyes of disbelief. What are you saying? You're an elite VP. You can't even come up with that much money when your own mother is in trouble? We come from a proper family. I'm telling you, that elite status is gone. The main bank, the clients, it was all on the orders of Sterling Price Capital. They all pulled out on me. Sterling Price, the biggest investment group in the country? Why would such a huge corporation suddenly come after a small local business like ours? The mother-in-law began to tremble on the floor. It was Grace's doing. She took the evidence of my embezzlement and leaked it to Sterling Price. No, it wasn't just a leak. She's connected to some huge, shadowy organization we can't even imagine. At Ethan's words, his mother shook her head hysterically. That poor, trashy girl? Impossible. A worthless girl with no family, no one would ever listen to her. It must be some kind of mistake. Then how do you explain this situation? All of this started happening right after we kicked her out yesterday. You can't just dismiss it as a coincidence. Ethan's roar finally silenced his mother. She covered her face with both hands and broke down, sobbing. Oh, why did this happen? My perfect life. Why, because of that low-class little girl? This is no time for crying. At this rate, we'll be completely erased from society. We have to find Grace and somehow beg for her forgiveness. Ethan frantically scrolled through his shattered smartphone with a desperate finger and dialed the number for the Sunnybrook Children's Home, the place he had threatened that morning. If Grace was taking refuge anywhere, it had to be there. But what came back was the cold, automated message indicating a blocked number. We're sorry. The party you are trying to reach is not accepting calls at this time. Damn it, why? In a panic, Ethan tried to contact Grace's friends and acquaintances, but then he realized a fatal fact. In the years of their marriage, he had been so utterly indifferent to Grace that he didn't know a single thing about her social life, let alone her hobbies or favorite places. What did I even know about her? Ethan, his mind solely on his own preservation, and his mother, capable only of weeping over her lost vanity. The two people who had looked down on Grace as a worthless human being without a proper family, who had thoroughly trampled on her dignity, were now trembling at the reality that they themselves were about to be discarded as worthless trash by society. Their panic and fear would only accelerate from here, as they were about to be confronted with the final, decisive truth. As dawn broke, a pale morning light streamed into the dim office. In the room where the air conditioning had been turned off, Ethan and his mother had spent the entire night making fruitless calls, only to be rejected time and again. Now, completely exhausted, they were collapsed on the floor. It's over. My life is completely over. With a stubble-covered chin and dark circles under his eyes, Ethan stared blankly at the ceiling. Beside him, his mother clutched her tattered, expensive blouse, her soul seemingly gone as she mumbled something incoherently. Something just didn't add up. Summoning his last ounce of strength, Ethan stood up and booted up his desk computer. Grace had undoubtedly stolen his secret ledger and leaked it to Sterling Price Capital. But how could a mere housewife have contacted the top executives of one of the largest investment groups in the country? Even if she had burst into a branch office with the evidence, there's no way the top brass would have immediately mobilized their entire corporate group on her word, Grace. Who at Sterling Price is she connected to? Could she be having an affair with one of the executives? Relying on his own vile imagination, Ethan typed Sterling Price Capital executives into the search engine. It was at that moment that the sound from the large wall-mounted television, which had been left on in the silent office, suddenly caught his ear. It was a morning business news program. Next up, a special feature. The colossal investment group said to drive the American economy from behind the scenes, Sterling Price Capital. A new face, long shrouded in mystery, has finally appeared in public. Sterling Price. Ethan's shoulders jolted, and he stared intently at the television screen. His mother, reacting to the name, crawled over to the front of the TV. On the screen, a large-scale press conference was being held in the grand ballroom of a luxury downtown hotel. Amidst countless flashing cameras, a lineup of executives from renowned corporations sat on the stage. Arthur Sterling, the founder and former chairman of the Sterling Group, had a successor whom he trusted above all others, a person to whom he secretly imparted his knowledge of business. It has been announced today that this person will officially assume the position of vice chair. As the anchor's calm voice spoke, the camera zoomed in on the center of the stage. A dumbfounded sound escaped Ethan's lips. Standing in the center of the screen, as if commanding the gray-haired executives around her, was a single young woman with a dignified presence. She wore a dark navy suit whose quality was palpable even through the screen, her back held perfectly straight as she stared ahead. Though her polished makeup and radiant aura made her seem like a completely different person, her face was unmistakably that of the woman Ethan had looked down on hundreds, thousands of times. Grace. As if seeing something unbelievable, Ethan clung to the television screen. Beside him, his mother's eyes widened as if they would pop out, and she screamed, "No way! Why? Why is that trashy woman standing up there? It must be a look-alike. It has to be." But as if to shatter their final grasp on denial, a large caption appeared on the screen, and the anchor announced the decisive fact. Sterling Price Capital's new vice chair, Grace Sterling. After losing her parents at a young age, she was raised in a children's home. However, her talent and deep empathy were recognized by the former chairman, Arthur Sterling, who adopted her and raised her as his own beloved daughter for many years. Adopted daughter of the founder of Sterling Price. The blood drained from Ethan's entire body in an instant. His knees gave out, and he collapsed onto the floor with a thud. On the screen, Grace began to speak to the sea of microphones with a quiet yet powerful voice. For many years, I have hidden my identity and lived as an ordinary member of society. This was because I wanted to be seen for who I am as a person, not for the Sterling Price name or money. However, in that process, I have seen far too many foolish people who judge others solely by their titles and social standing, and who carelessly inflict pain on others. Though her words were directed at the unspecified public through the television, to Ethan, it sounded as if Grace was looking directly into their eyes and speaking to them. As the vice chair of Sterling Price Capital, I will enforce strict adherence to compliance. We will not engage in any future business with companies or individuals who trample on human dignity. This is also my personal conviction. Bathed in the flash of cameras, her steely eyes did not waver for a moment. They were the exact same cold eyes that had looked at them as she left the apartment the night before. Ah. A choked wheezing sound escaped from the back of Ethan's throat. The orphan. the parentless girl, the worthless woman. The wife they had called these names, mocked, and subjected to a torrent of abuse. She was not just a helpless girl. She was the head of a colossal group that moved the American economy, a person who could control Ethan's company and the bank that financed his mother's business with a flick of her finger. They were nothing more than pawns in her game. No, no. Ethan clutched his head and let out a beast-like scream. That time, when I told her, "You can't even survive without me." What must she have been thinking as she looked at me? Realizing the absurdity of his own arrogance and the irreversible magnitude of his mistake, Ethan writhed on the floor, sobbing. It was never about status or real family. I could never have constrained her with such flimsy things. With my own hands, I threw away the greatest fortune of my life into the gutter. His mother, her face pale as if she were about to faint, had collapsed in front of the TV, tears and snot streaming down her face as she trembled. To think she was the daughter of such an incredible family. I made her work like a maid. I told her she had no background. Oh, if only I had treated her well, our family would have been secure for life. The moment their world, where they had believed themselves to be the absolute powerful, was completely turned upside down. The truth that the lonely girl they had mocked was the absolute ruler who held their lives in her hands. The brutally cruel revelation, a tidal wave of despair and regret, completely swallowed the minds of the two. But the final judgment for them, who had fallen into a hell of their own making, was not yet over. The television screen mercilessly switched to the next news segment, and a cheerful morning weather forecast began to play. But in the office, a cold, heavy silence, like that of a graveyard, lay over the room. "Arg!" from Ethan's mouth, collapsed on the floor. Only meaningless groans escaped like a broken record. His wife was not just an orphan, but the head of a mega-corporation that controlled the country. Faced with this overwhelming fact, his flimsy pride had shattered into dust, leaving only the pure terror of losing everything. "Ethan, this is no time to be dazed!" It was his mother who suddenly broke the silence with a shrill cry. She crawled over to Ethan and shook his shoulders frantically. On TV, she said she wouldn't forgive people who judge others by their titles. "Well, you married her without knowing her true worth. That's a fact, isn't it? You loved her for herself. If you remind her of that, she'll surely forgive you." Her eyes shone with a strange light, a mixture of terror and greed. She was starved for family, love her whole life. If we get on our knees, cry, and tell her we want to start over as a real family, she'll definitely take pity on us. That's right. If she comes back, the vast fortune of Sterling Price Capital will all be ours. Her words, completely detached from reality, were utterly selfish and ridiculous. She had completely erased from her mind the past where she had relentlessly tormented Grace and treated her worse than a servant. But Ethan, in his extreme state of panic, clung to his mother's crazed proposal like a drowning man grasping at a straw. "That's it. The divorce papers are still in my briefcase. I haven't submitted them yet, so legally, we're still married. She can't do this to me, her husband." With trembling hands, Ethan pulled his business bag toward him and fished out the divorce papers Grace had quietly signed. "If I tear this up, I'm the husband of the vice chair of Sterling Price Capital. My position is secure." With a ripping sound, he tore the divorce papers to shreds and began to laugh hysterically. But that pathetic glimmer of hope was crushed in an instant. Bang! A loud noise echoed through the office again, and the door was thrown open. "You just don't know when to quit, Thompson." Standing there was the CEO of his company, his face red with rage. Behind him stood several unfamiliar men in suits with stern faces, as well as security guards. "Sir, it's not what you think. It's a misunderstanding. Grace is my wife, and I'm about to go talk to Sterling Price directly." "Shut up! Are you still spouting nonsense at a time like this?" The CEO's shout made the office windows rattle. "We just received official notice from Sterling Price's legal counsel. It's a mountain of definitive evidence that you've been embezzling company money for years and taking kickbacks from subcontractors. Every single receipt from your stays at luxury hotels with your mistress is neatly accounted for." The CEO slammed a thick stack of files into Ethan's face. The documents scattered across the floor. They were all copies of the secret ledger Ethan had hidden in his safe. "You are terminated for cause. Effective today." And that's not all. "We will be suing you personally for the massive damages our company has incurred and the penalties from our clients. A rough estimate is no less than $50 million. $50 million. Ethan's eyes bulged and he stopped breathing. It was a hopeless figure he could never repay in a lifetime. Take this disgusting criminal away. I don't want him in my company for another second. At the CEO's signal, burly security guards grabbed Ethan by both arms. No, let go of me. I'm the husband of the vice chair of Sterling Price. If I tell Grace, she'll have you all fired in an instant. Arg. Ethan was dragged across the floor, letting out a pathetic scream. Wait just a minute. I am Ethan's mother. How dare you treat me, a woman from a prominent family, with such disrespect? Just as his mother was about to hysterically confront the guards, her smartphone rang shrilly in her handbag. Her shoulders jolted. With trembling hands, she looked at the screen. It was from the veteran manager of her boutique. Hello? What is it? Ma'am, it's terrible. The people from the bank just came with a court officer and put a foreclosure notice on the store's door. They've seized everything in the safe, all the dresses. Another officer is on his way to your house right now. From the other end of the line came the sound of the manager's sobbing and the rough clatter of things being carried away. Ah, my reputation. My high society life. The mother-in-law's smartphone slipped from her hand, and her eyes rolled back as she collapsed to the floor in a dead faint. Mom, damn it! Let me go, let me go! What did I do? Ethan screamed, his face a mess of tears and snot. But the guards showed no mercy, dragging the unconscious mother and the weeping Ethan out of the office and dumping them like trash. The morning sun shone brightly. Thrown onto the concrete ground in front of the building's entrance, Ethan was met with the cold, curious stares of the office workers coming to work, and he curled up in a miserable ball. The arrogant man who, just hours ago, had believed himself to be a successful elite, had reached his pathetic end. Grace. Scraping the concrete, staring at his bleeding fingernails, Ethan stood up with a crazed, bloodshot look in his eyes. My life can't end here. That's right, Grace. I just have to go see Grace and talk to her. She loves me. She'll definitely forgive me. Having completely lost his sanity, Ethan left his unconscious mother on the ground and began to walk on shaky legs. His destination was singular: the headquarters of the colossal Sterling Price capital, the building that stood at the apex of the American economy. Unaware that what awaited him was not a glimmer of hope but the final, irreversible despair, Ethan walked his own path to hell. In the heart of downtown Manhattan, a towering skyscraper of steel and glass, exuding an imposing aura, stood tall. This was the headquarters of Sterling Price Capital, the very heart of the American economy. The people coming and going were all top-tier elites dressed in tailored suits. Into this beautifully polished lobby, a man with a disheveled tie, a stubbly beard, and bloodshot eyes burst in, shouting frantically, I need to see Grace Sterling. I'm her husband. You can't keep me out. Sir, you need to calm down. Please leave the premises, or we will have to call the police. Pinned by several burly security guards, Ethan continued to struggle, his voice echoing with entitlement. Get your hands off me! I have a right to see my wife! Grace, get down here and talk to me. The surrounding elite employees passed by, giving him the kind of cold, disdainful stare one would give a piece of filth. Grace, I know you can hear me. I was wrong. We're still married, damn it, Ethan screamed, trying to wrench himself free. It was at that moment. How utterly pathetic. I must ask you not to defile the lobby of Sterling Price any further. A quiet but ice-cold voice, filled with enough authority to change the atmosphere of the entire room, echoed out. The security guards cleared a path, and standing there was an older gentleman in a perfectly tailored three-piece suit. It was Grace's executive assistant, Harrison. Mr. Harrison, you. Ethan's eyes widened in shock, but he quickly saw an opportunity. You. Tell Grace to get down here. This is a misunderstanding between a husband and wife. And I tore up those divorce papers. They're gone. We are still legally married. Legally married? Huh. What fantasy are you living in? Harrison coldly flicked his gaze over Ethan's disheveled form, using his cane to block Ethan's path without even touching him. Those papers you so dramatically tore up were a color copy. The original was retrieved last night, and our legal team filed it with the court at 8:30 this morning. Your divorce has been officially finalized. Ah, a copy? Yes. You are now, in the eyes of the law, a complete stranger to Vice Chair Sterling. The lawsuits for damages and compensation will be served to you shortly. A $50 million bill, I believe. No, that's a lie. I don't accept it. I'm her husband. She's nothing without me. She was just a lonely girl I saved. Panicked, Ethan continued to spew the same diluted insults. In that instant, an absolute, zero-degree anger, devoid of all emotion, filled Harrison's eyes. You truly are a hopeless, foolish man. Harrison sighed deeply and looked down at Ethan with the same expression one would use for an insect. Did you really believe that you were promoted to VP and put in charge of that massive redevelopment project on your own merit? Huh? At Harrison's sudden words, Ethan froze. Think about it. A man in his 30s with no outstanding sales record and a petty disposition gets a promotion at unprecedented speed and is put in charge of a multi-billion-dollar project. And just at the right time, a massive amount of funding comes in from a major investment fund. Such a fairy tale doesn't just happen by chance with your meager talent, does it? What are you talking about? That was my skill. My hard work was recognized. It was all a stage set by Sterling Price Capital. The ultimate truth from Harrison's mouth struck Ethan like a physical blow, and his entire body went rigid. Miss Sterling? No, Vice Chair Sterling. Wanted to believe in your character, from the bottom of her heart. That is why the former chairman decided to test you, to give you power and money and see if you were a man of integrity, or just another greedy parasite. Harrison's words echoed heavily in the silent lobby. If you had cherished Miss Sterling without becoming arrogant after your promotion, that downtown redevelopment project would have been a historic success, and in a few years, you were slated to be officially welcomed as an executive of the Sterling Group. An executive? Of Sterling Price? A voice, as if his soul had been ripped out, escaped Ethan's lips. Yes, a place at the pinnacle of the American economy was promised to you from the very beginning. But what was the result? The moment you got a small title, you showed your true colors and revealed your naked arrogance. Harrison spoke with the coldness of a final judgment. You looked down on your wife as worthless, wounded her dignity with your abuse, embezzled company money, and paraded your mistress around. With your own hands, for the sake of your shallow vanity and desires, you threw away the most valuable platinum ticket in the world into a sewer. Ah, arg. The full weight of his colossal stupidity crashed down on him. He hadn't been superior, nor had he been talented. He had been nothing more than a ridiculous clown, dancing on the palm of his wife's hand, a wife who was as kind and powerful as a goddess. His elite status, his accomplishments, all a sandbox toy given to him by her family. What have I? Realizing the depth of his own stupidity, his bottomless arrogance, and the immense scale of what he had lost, Ethan's knees buckled. He didn't bow. He collapsed onto the pristine marble floor. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness, but a raw, animalistic howl of loss. What have I done? What did I throw away? He slammed his fist against the floor, a guttural sob of pure, selfish regret echoing through the silent, cavernous lobby. He wept for the lost money, the lost status, and the lost future. He wept for himself. But Harrison showed him not a shred of sympathy and turned his back on him coldly. Get this trash out of my sight, and ensure he never sets foot on this property again. Thrown out like garbage by the security guards onto the cold asphalt outside, Ethan looked up. The massive Sterling Price building, reflecting the sunlight, towered over him as if to reject him forever. The ultimate fate for a man who had judged and trampled on others as worthless was to be confronted with the brutally cruel reality that his own life had been completely worthless. It was the highest form of despair. On the top floor of the Sterling Price Capital headquarters, in a room that seemed to look down on the clouds, the vice chair's office was furnished with a heavy mahogany desk and a refined interior devoid of any unnecessary decoration. Standing in front of the room's enormous glass window, I was quietly looking down at the New York cityscape below, the cars and people moving about like miniatures. Once, in that small, boxed-in world, I had lived in fear of Ethan's heartless words, enduring my mother-in-law's harassment, living as if holding my breath. Now, all of that felt like a distant memory from a past life. A discreet knock broke the silence, and the heavy door opened. Vice Chair Sterling, I have returned. Good work, Harrison. It seems it was quite noisy downstairs, I asked without taking my eyes off the window. Harrison quietly walked to my side and nodded respectfully. Yes, the recently dismissed Ethan Thompson was causing a scene in the lobby. I have handled the matter and strengthened security to ensure he never approaches this building again. You will not be troubled by this matter again. And what did he say? A series of pathetic outbursts. He claimed to be your husband, then completely fell apart when confronted with the truth. He was begging for another chance, to get it all back. Hearing Harrison's report, I let out a short, sharp breath. Another chance. He would never know how long I had waited for those words. For years after we were married, as his emotional abuse escalated and he began his affair, I tried to confront him many times. I know you're busy with work, But can we talk? If there's something wrong with me, I'll fix it. I just want us to laugh together like we used to. I reached out to him so many times, but each time, he trampled on my heart with his words, "A lowlife with no family like you has no right to have an opinion." "It's too late," I said, placing a hand on the glass window, my cool eyes fixed on the city. "After you've chipped away at a person's trust, torn it to shreds, and then ask for a do-over. That kind of convenient magic doesn't exist in the real world." "You are absolutely right," Harrison said with a deep nod, placing the file he was holding on the desk. "With this, all matters concerning them have been settled. This is a final status report, but would you care to hear about their current situations?" "Yes, tell me." I turned and sat down in the chair at my desk, and Harrison began his report in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. First, regarding the mother-in-law. Her boutique and real estate company have officially gone bankrupt as of today. With the withdrawal of the bank loan, everything from the store's inventory to her home furniture, and even the designer goods and jewelry she hoarded, has been seized. So she ended up experiencing the public scrutiny she feared most, in the worst possible way. Yes. She became the talk of her neighborhood and was kicked out of her house like a vagrant. She has no relatives to turn to and is apparently moving between cheap motels, but who knows how long that will last. The mother-in-law had been obsessed with the intangible concepts of status and connections, and had thoroughly looked down on me, but her own life had been a facade built on massive debt and vanity. Now that the plating had been stripped away, there was no real family anywhere in the world to help her. Next, regarding Jessica, Ethan's mistress. The moment she learned of Ethan's downfall, she abandoned him and fled. Harrison continued with a somewhat cold smile. However, the credit card payments for the luxury goods that Ethan had been buying for her were all in her name. With Ethan's accounts frozen and his payments stopped, she is now burdened with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. The collection agencies have already started calling, and with her salary, she will inevitably have to declare bankruptcy. The woman who laughed that you can't win against a real family was also only connected by the flimsy bond of money. Indeed. And finally, regarding Ethan, Harrison lowered his voice slightly and looked me straight in the eye. In addition to his dismissal for cause, he is now facing over $50 million in liabilities, including massive damages to the company and a claim for the return of the funds he embezzled. Even if he declares bankruptcy, damages from criminal acts like embezzlement are not dischargeable. He will spend the rest of his life carrying that crime and debt, living a life of utter destitution, a $50 million debt, and the complete loss of his social credibility. He, who had believed himself to be a winner and sneered at me as a helpless woman who can't survive without me, had not only lost me but also his status, honor, money, future, his entire life. "It's all over," I said, taking a deep breath and then slowly exhaling. I felt the cold, heavy block of ice that had been lodged deep in my chest melt away with a crack. There was no sadness, no anger, nothing left. No matter what hell they crawled through from now on, not a single wave would stir in my heart. "Miss Sterling, you have defended your dignity well." Harrison looked at me not as an assistant, but with the gentle gaze of a father, and bowed his head deeply. "The former chairman is surely resting in peace, relieved to see you freed from the shackles of the past, standing at the pinnacle of sterling price, and starting a new life." Remembering my adoptive father's warm, large hand, I felt my eyes well up. I will not look back anymore. I have to live up to his expectations. I stood up and turned my gaze back to the window. In the afternoon, a brilliant ray of sunlight was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the city of New York in a golden light. "Now, Harrison, there's no time to be sentimental." "What is my afternoon schedule?" I asked in a strong voice, fully back in my role as Grace Sterling. Harrison instantly switched back to his professional assistant persona. "Yes. At 2 p.m., you have the final approval meeting for an investment in a new medical venture. After that, you have an online meeting with our overseas partners." The day that brought their lives to a complete end was also the new starting line for me, the orphan, to regain my true freedom and pride, and to carve out a future with my own strength. I would no longer wait for happiness to be given to me by someone else. I would stand on my own 2 feet and walk through this world with my own convictions. My reflection in the windowpane was clearer and more proudly radiant than ever before. Half a year had passed in the blink of an eye since I signed the divorce papers and left that apartment. The seasons had turned, and a biting winter wind now whipped through New York. On a frigid construction site, a man in a work uniform caked with mud and grease shivered as he hauled a heavy steel pipe. "Hey you, old man!" Don't just stand there daydreaming. Get the next batch of materials now. A foreman in his 20s, wearing a hard hat, barked at him without mercy. Sorry, right away. The man bowed his head obsequiously and gripped the steel pipe with hands numb from the cold. It was the pathetic sight of my ex-husband Ethan, who once strutted around believing he was a chosen elite and laughed at me as a lowlife. Saddled with a staggering $50 million in damages and debt, he was, of course, denied bankruptcy. Kicked out of his luxury apartment, he now lived in a room in a run-down boarding house with a shared bathroom and a constant draft, paying a few $100s a month. He worked sanitation by day and grueling manual labor like this by night. He slept less than 3 hours a day, and most of the money he earned went to paying off his debt. His former designer suits had been replaced with tattered work clothes, and his once confident face was so worn with fatigue and despair that he looked more than 10 years older than his actual age. As Ethan carried the heavy materials, he thought of the even more miserable fates of the women who had abandoned him. His mistress, Jessica, burdened with the debt from the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of luxury goods Ethan had bought her, eventually ended up on a blacklist after trying to evade her creditors. She now works in a dive bar on the outskirts of town, pouring cheap drinks for drunken customers every night, living in fear of collection agents. Her youthful, flashy beauty was gone, and beneath her thick makeup, the exhaustion was deeply etched. And his mother, who had been so obsessed with her high-class status and connections, who had relentlessly called me a worthless girl with no family. After all her assets were seized, her relatives disowned her, calling her a pretentious liar, and she was completely isolated. She now works in the back of a supermarket, her hands red and swollen from the cold water, washing and packing prepared foods from morning till night. You know, I'm not supposed to be doing this kind of menial work. I was a socialite, she would mutter to herself, only to be berated by the younger shift leader. Stop moving your mouth and start moving your hands, Grandma, she would then cry silently as she gripped a greasy sponge. For her, who had lived her life on vanity and pride, being disrespected and ordered around as a bottom-rung worker was a living hell. Why? Why did my life turn out like this? After his shift, walking alone through the freezing pre-dawn city, Ethan clutched a $1 can of coffee in his cracked hands and sobbed. I was an elite VP. I had a beautiful mistress, lived in a fancy apartment. My life was supposed to be perfect. It was at that moment. In the plaza in front of Grand Central Terminal, where people were hurrying to catch the first trains, the massive digital billboard on the side of a building flickered to life. And now, for a special interview. We spoke with the young leader who will guide the next generation of the American economy. At the voice from the morning business news, Ethan jolted and looked up. Displayed in the center of the giant screen was a woman in a beautiful, pure white suit, smiling with confident poise. The caption below her glowed brightly. Grace Sterling, Vice Chair, Sterling Price Capital. Grace. Ethan gasped and stood frozen on the spot. The woman on the screen radiated a level of beauty and aura that was on a completely different plane from the plain and frumpy wife he had once looked down on. Her eyes were full of confidence, yet also a deep compassion for everyone. Her voice, as she answered the interviewer's questions, echoed clearly across the plaza. Yes, Sterling Price Capital plans to make even more substantial investments in educational support for children's homes and children without families. True value is not found in visible things like social standing, titles, or family history. The real value lies in the sincere heart of a person who strives to move forward, no matter how harsh their environment. Her words were like a sharp, icy blade piercing Ethan's heart. True success will never come to those who can only judge people by titles and numbers, and who have forgotten compassion. I want to help build a warmer society, a society with a heart, where people can stand in each other's shoes and extend a helping hand. At her dignified words, the commuters walking through the plaza began to stop one by one, looking up at the billboard and murmuring, "What a great leader!" At the very back of the crowd, Ethan, in his mud-caked work clothes, could only tremble. Ah. The can of coffee slipped from his hand and rolled onto the asphalt, leaving a brown stain. Ethan looked back and forth between the filthy puddle at his feet and the radiant image of Grace on the screen, and finally collapsed to his knees. The woman he had discarded as a worthless nobody was a noble, beautiful, and respected figure at the pinnacle of society. And he, in her place, had crushed the world's greatest treasure with his own hands, clinging instead to the cheap scrap of his own vanity, and was now groveling in a filthy puddle. Grace, I was an idiot. I was so wrong about everything. Ethan pressed his forehead against the cold asphalt and cried like a wild animal, oblivious to the stares of the people around him. No matter how much he cried, no matter how much he regretted, the warm dinner table, her gentle smile, and his own brilliant career would never return. All that was left for them was an endless hell of karmic retribution, where the contempt and coldness they had shown to others would be returned to them 100-fold. From the giant billboard, the image of Grace seemed to look down on Ethan's pathetic wails with a quiet and completely indifferent smile. It was the all-too-perfect, satisfyingly merciless end for arrogant people who had written off another human being as worthless. 1 full year had passed since that day in Ethan's frigid living room, when I quietly signed my name on that piece of paper and ended everything. My life had changed dramatically. The suffocating days of enduring emotional abuse and endless condescension were completely gone, replaced by fulfilling days But no matter how busy I became, there was one place I made sure to visit once a month. Sunnybrook Children's Home, nestled on a lush green hill in the suburbs of New York, my cherished home, where I had taken refuge as a child, and which I continued to support. On this holiday, I had shed the formal suit and high heels of the vice chair, and was visiting in the guise of an ordinary woman, wearing a soft ivory knit sweater and comfortable flat shoes. "Grace, you're here. Come play with us." "Grace, look, I learned how to shoot a three-pointer yesterday." The moment I stepped onto the grounds, children without families came running towards me with beaming smiles. The old building, once dilapidated and drafty, had been transformed by the full support of the Sterling Group into a beautiful facility filled with the warmth of wood and equipped with the latest amenities. I knelt down and gently cupped the small apple-red cheeks of the children, flushed from the cold winter wind. "Wow, that's really amazing. But be careful not to get hurt, okay? We'll have cake for a snack later." Feeling the pure, warm touch of the children, I felt the last bit of coldness that had once encased my heart melt away as if it were a lie. They were all children like I once was, who had suddenly lost their families and were carrying a deep loneliness due to the selfish whims of adults. That is why I continued to provide them with enriching educational programs and full-ride scholarships for college, so that when they grew up, they would never again have to despair that they were worthless. "Grace, thank you so much for coming today, even with your busy schedule." The director, Mrs. Gable, greeted me with a mug of freshly brewed tea. The face that had been trembling with fear a year ago from my ex-husband's selfish threats now held only a calm, gentle smile. "Not at all, Mrs. Gable. To me, this is the one place I can truly relax, like a real home." Seeing the children's bright smiles always gives me so much energy. We sat down on the newly built, sun-drenched wooden deck, and the warm, gentle winter sun wrapped around our shoulders. The new library, the new computer lab. The children use them every day, their eyes sparkling. But more than anything, the fact that you come to see them regularly is the biggest encouragement for them. "You're the one who gave these kids the freedom and hope to choose their future," Mrs. Gable murmured. Her eyes narrowed as she watched the children energetically chasing a soccer ball on the field. Then, her expression suddenly turned serious, and she looked me straight in the eye. "But you know, sometimes I really wonder." "Wonder about what?" I tilted my head, and Mrs. Gable continued quietly, cradling her mug in both hands. "Grace, you lost your parents early, you were passed around by relatives, and you had a truly difficult childhood. Even as an adult, you were torn apart by that terrible husband and his family, your dignity trampled. You've experienced enough deep suffering that no one would blame you if you resented the world, stopped trusting people, and closed off your heart." Her voice trembled slightly. "So how can you still be so kind? How can you still have so much compassion?" At that direct question, I was a little surprised, and then a natural smile spread across my face. What came to mind was not the twisted faces of the 3 people who had called me trash, but the gentle smile of my adoptive father, who had given me unconditional love and taught me what true richness is. "That's because, Mrs. Gable," I began, my eyes still on the children playing on the field, my voice carrying softly into the clear winter air. "People who know loneliness don't easily abandon others." Loneliness? Yes. The emptiness of not being needed by anyone. The bottomless terror of being unreasonably oppressed and made to believe you have no value. I know all too well how dark, how cold, and how it can kill a person's spirit from the core. I gently placed a hand on my chest. That's why, when I see someone else trembling in loneliness and asking for help, I can't help but reach out my hand. If I had lived a life like theirs, protected by a prestigious family and money, a life where I never had to imagine the pain of others, I would never have been able to connect with the hearts of these children. That is the one true strength I received from that harsh past. Because I have been hurt, I understand the pain in people's hearts. Because I have a past of loss, I can cherish the small happiness right in front of me as the most precious thing of all. I see. You've become a truly strong and beautiful woman. A single tear rolled down Mrs. Gable's cheek. I gently took out a handkerchief and wiped her warm tear away. A particularly bright ray of light broke through the clouds, warmly illuminating the deck where we sat. I looked up at the high, clear blue winter sky. That day, in that living room filled with cruel words, the moment I signed the divorce papers without shedding a single tear, was indeed the day a marriage came to a complete end. It was the day I was decisively betrayed and thrown away like a useless object by the person I had believed in with all my heart and tried to build a life with. But now, bathed in this light, I understand clearly. What ended that day was not my life. At that moment, I was forever liberated from a place that did not value me, and from a life of pretending to be someone I wasn't, a life of just enduring being looked down upon. That night, when they were gloating in their victory, believing they had handed me my final sentence, was in fact the brilliant first step for me to stand on my own 2 feet and reclaim my true freedom and pride. Ethan and his family, who could only measure a person's worth by flimsy things like money, titles, and connections, who never tried to see my true heart, they are now paying the price for the coldness they showed to others, tasting a hell where they will grovel in the mud for the rest of their lives. The very people who mocked me as a lonely orphan have now become the most unloved, the most lonely, and the most pitiful beings of all. Grace, hurry up. Let's play tag. You all have so much energy. I'm coming. Called by the children's bright, bouncing voices, I put down my mug, stretched, and stood up. Feeling the definite breath of spring in the cold winter air, I ran towards the circle of children. My life may have various difficulties waiting for me in the future, but I will never be lost again, because I have precious people to protect, and the true pride to believe in myself.